L'honorable député de Laurentides-Labelle.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle.
Monsieur le Président, le Canada, dans sa courte
Mr. Speaker, Canada, in its short existence, has committed many reprehensible acts. Think of the First Nations and Inuit nations who have experienced and continue to experience discrimination, while many communities still lack access to clean water. Think of the Chinese community who were unfairly taxed when they came to Canada and who worked on the railroad in deplorable conditions. Think of Ontario's Regulation 17 to assimilate Franco-Ontarians and other similar laws passed in other provinces. Think of the members of the Japanese community who were interned during the Second World War. Another community victimized by Canada is, of course, the Italian-Canadian community. This community richly deserves an apology from the federal government. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I join my colleagues in denouncing the treatment of the Italian-Canadian community from 1940 to 1945. At that time, Canada had implemented the War Measures Act. This allowed it to intern and to discriminate against many Canadians without a warrant on the sole grounds that they were from countries with which Canada was at war. The government quickly took a series of discriminatory measures against its own citizens. This was the case for Italian Canadians after Canada declared war on Italy on June 10, 1940. Overnight, 31,000 Italian Canadians were officially designated as enemy aliens solely because they were from Italy. Some of these people had lived in Canada for decades. They were fully integrated into society, and yet they were still enemies in the eyes of Canada. This designation of enemy aliens was accompanied by a series of discriminatory measures against people who had not committed any crime. These measures included the requirement that all Italian-born persons register with the authorities with monthly checks and restrictions on their freedom of movement across Canada. The government could enter people's homes and conduct searches of their property. While Canada was desperately short of labor to help the war effort in factories, Italian Canadians lived in extreme poverty, often unable to find basic employment. Boycotts against Italian Canadian-owned businesses were common. The government also seized and ordered the closure of Italian associations. There were also the imprisonment of more than 600 Italian Canadians between 1940 and 1945. In Montreal alone, 200 men were interned. These men were imprisoned because they were thought to be sympathetic to Mussolini's fascist regime, and sometimes they were. Mussolini's regime did use the diaspora to further its own interests. Many Italian nationals, like many other Canadians, were seduced by fascism, but many of the Italian Canadians interned had no connection to Mussolini's regime. Their internment was discriminatory and unfounded. If the internment of these men was unjust, imagine the difficulties experienced by their relatives. The testimony received from their families is blood-curdling. Women, often already living in poverty, were suddenly left alone with several children, no income, no government assistance. Children died of malnutrition in the complete indifference of the authorities. Some women had to work 3 jobs to ensure that their children could eat. Families didn't have news about their detained loved ones for months. All of these stories show how the policies of the Canadian government left deep scars on an entire community. We cannot remain indifferent to the discrimination experienced by Italian Canadians. The government is apologizing to this community today after more than 80 years. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I wish to reiterate to the Italian Quebec community all of our gratitude for their important contribution to Quebec society. Denouncing their unfair treatment by the government is an essential step in recognizing their contribution to our society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.